drama around stablecoin Binance USD continues on as Paxos, the issuer of the $16 billion BUSD stablecoin, says it would stop issuing the token amid mounting regulatory pressure and has burned more than $700 million worth of BUSD since Monday. Joining us now is Austin Campbell, former Paxos head of portfolio management and Columbia Business School adjunct professor. Austin, thanks for joining us. So you wrote an op-ed for us at CoinDesk called "Stablecoins Are Not New. So Why Are Regulators Attacking Paxos?" Give us the gist.
Yeah, so I would say in many ways, stablecoins are a very simple instrument, almost identical to trillions of dollars of things that already exist in finance. The promise of you're going to give somebody money and later on they will give you back $1 is something that already exists. That's your bank account. That's a money market fund. These are things that are pretty understandable and pretty normal. And I would say stablecoins are a very small rounding error on the total outstanding amount of these kinds of instruments in the United States. So one of the things that's always been a little bit confounding to me is the extreme sort of noise and confusion around them when really they work very similar to the things we're already familiar with and, quite frankly, had a great deal of reform in post the 2008 crisis.
Yeah, Professor Campbell, if you will, of course, I have to question because it doesn't seem that they're so concerned about stablecoins per se, and even how Paxos might have been issuing these stablecoins. From what I'm gathering, and maybe I'm wrong, but it might have to do with what Binance did after those BUSDs were issued, and that is issuing a stablecoin against the stablecoin. In other words, a second derivative, if you will, of this, and not necessarily backing that new issuance with the stablecoin itself. That seems to be a question here, correct? In other words, it's not a question of what Paxos did in issuing the stablecoin, having it overseen by bank regulators and whatever they had going on with New York Department of Financial Services, but what then Binance did afterwards and said, oh, well, we're going to just put on another chain and we're going to issue all these pegged BUSD tokens on these other chains. Well, it's like, well, what's backing those guys? And that seems to have been up in the air. So it doesn't seem like an attack on stablecoins, is it?
Well, if that's the view that's being taken, I think there's several misunderstandings embedded in that, right? Which is to say, if you look at all of the major stablecoins, so look at Tether, look at Circle, look at Paxos's products, they're all bridged onto other chains. And all of the bridges work in very similar fashion for the most part, right? At least until Circle and Tether developed APIs that allow you to atomize a coin on one chain and create it somewhere else. But you have bridges across all of these chains where you can lock coins from one chain, store them, and then represent it on another chain. That's essentially what Binance was doing. They have a page that tracks all of the reserves that you can access through the Binance website. You can essentially substantiate they're there. Now, I'll grant you in the rapid scaling, some of that was clunkier in the past and much harder to track, but they're just bridging tokens. So you have an Ethereum BUSD that has been issued by Paxos that works the way you would expect with the NYDFS, and then people bridge it elsewhere. And part of the reason Binance started doing it is before they were doing it, other people were doing the bridging in less reliable fashion. So if the stance is that the problem is essentially coins being bridged across many chains without express, and complete permission from a regulator, I think that is a problem for all stablecoins. And if it's not that, people should be a little more specific as to the objection.
So I guess the question, though, is this, is that wasn't there a situation before where Binance actually didn't have as many reserves as they had when they issued those bridge tokens, correct? I mean, wasn't there a controversy before about that the timing wasn't necessarily instantaneous, but that there was some lag or significant amount of lag that would make it seem as if there were more coins issued than there were in the reserves?
So I think this is one of those classic settlement problems. I've written about this a little bit back to traditional finance. So I'll just turn the question around and say this. If I've got a wire from people that's moving through the banking system to create reserves to mint BUSD, at what point am I certain I have the money? and then a similar item for operations with off-chain stuff. For instance, if Binance is representing, say there's 18 billion of BUSD in the world, and they represent 15 billion on the exchange and 3 billion locked in this wrap contract, and you look at records elsewhere and see 14 and 4, what we have is a left-hand, right-hand accounting issue, not a total outstanding issue. And so understanding the total balance for Binance requires looking at everything they have in all of their exchange wallets and then the bridge wallet. And again, that process was pretty poor in the past. We had spoken to them and they've upgraded it significantly since then.
So just to put this much more simply, do you think that this is just a way to go after Binance? I mean, is that basically what's happening? Is that regulators are going through Paxos to get to Binance because they can't get to Binance directly?
Well, if you look at the recent actions across the crypto market, so leaving aside just Paxos, I would say I think regulators in general failed to adequately address Celsius, Terra, FTX, and now we're going after any of the on-ramps that they can to try to reduce access to the system. So I think that is, a bullet point on a larger agenda that's occurring here, because the same thing is happening with the banking regulators and some of their policy statements and trying to restrict access for crypto companies to the banking system.
But sort of to follow up on that, right? I mean, you have Paxos, which it deserves some credit for kind of playing by the rules, right? Like they went through all the effort of, getting sort of going through the DFS, and they're getting slammed, right? So is this, in a way, are they kind of getting punished for trying to play by the rules? Because this is a big criticism of U.S. regulation. Binance is sort of outside the system, right? But Paxos is inside the system, which is potentially why the regulators are going after Paxos. I mean, are they sort of getting punished for good intentions here?
I think there's definitely some truth to that. I mean, if you look at probably the past month, the biggest winner in the stablecoin space is Tether. So that should tell you something about what the actual impact of these actions are, regardless of the intent. And the lesson it's showing people is that over the past few years, probably the greatest mistake you could have made is to be an onshore regulated company in the crypto space. Right, you're the ones constantly getting punished, fined, and harassed, even though you're not the ones who lost user money. And a lot of people offshore have done things that are significantly more objectionable and are not facing the same degree of scrutiny.
So Bloomberg reported that Circle was the one that sounded the alarm of Paxos and told the NYDFS that Binance's stablecoin wasn't fully backed. So I guess the question here was whether or not there were enough reserves, as Lawrence explained, and that if they're playing by the rules, that there are others who may not be. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say as a general matter, it's always dangerous to run to the regulator unless your house is in perfect order. Certainly, the banking sector has learned that the hard way a few times in the past. But I would say, I think it's important when you're looking at activities that involve the combination of on-chain and off-chain exposures to have a complete picture of those before leaping to conclusions. Like, this has been sort of revealed in some of the difficulties the CeFi institutions have had, like the Celsiuses and FTXs of the world, is these things are hard to evaluate from the outside. And so I don't have a problem with somebody making the claim, but it should be substantiated with full information, as opposed to just believed when you see half of the picture, right? That's very different than like a DeFi protocol where all exposures are on chain and you can measure both sides.
So ultimately, why did Paxos stop issuing BUSD if it was fully backed, and if they could have shown regulators, hey, everything's fine, and the pegged BUSD is fine, everything's okay, here it is, here's the documents, here's anything you want, we're not doing anything wrong, why then stop?
So keeping in mind I'm no longer at Paxos, this is a little bit of speculation. Number one, they issue it at the pleasure of the NYDFS, so it's not really Paxos's decision. If the NYDFS tells you to stop, you have to stop. That is the problem with being an onshore regulated company. And as to the second part, there are potentially more issues the NYDFS could have in theory than just the reserve backing. If you look at the regulatory regime for the NYDFS, they have rules about operations, controls, reserves, consumer protections, KYC, AML. there's a laundry list of things you have to do. It is not a trivial regime to comply with, and complying with it to complete perfection is, probably close to impossible. Just like every bank somewhere is committing some sort of error because there's so many rules they have to follow. So the question is there something substantive that we don't yet know? Or are regulators who want to crack down on crypto using this as a pretext in order to just shut things down? I would tell you transparently, both are possible. You'll find out in the long run.
Just one last quick question. Why are they burning the tokens now, and what would the effect of that be?
Yeah, that's customers redeeming, right? Keep in mind the way any of the properly regulated stablecoins work is that you can give, say, Paxos or Circle $1 and get a token, or you can give them a token and get $1 back. So in any time of stress, you see people come in and start burning tokens in size to either get back into the traditional financial system or go into other stablecoins that they feel are safer. And given the regulatory scrutiny here, it doesn't surprise me that you're having significant amounts of redemptions. I will say, personally speaking, the attestations for BUSD are online. They completely reveal all of the securities they hold. It's pretty obvious the money is there. So they could redeem every single dollar, but it doesn't surprise me that people are coming to liquidate, especially if they think BUSD is going to be wound down.
All right, Professor, thanks for breaking it all down for us. That was Professor Jesse Austin Campbell, former Paxos head of portfolio management and Columbia Business School adjunct professor.